My son and his wife posted a photo on the deck of the largest cruise ship in the world, holding mimosa cocktails. The caption read, "Family vacation, just the three of us." In a way, they weren't lying. They brought their biological son, and they brought all their luggage. But they left my 8-year-old adopted granddaughter locked inside a pitch-black house, with nothing but a single loaf of moldy bread and a note that said, "Be good." They thought I was just a retired old man who would never find out. They forgot that before I was a grandfather, I was a logistic commander in the United States Army, and my rule has always been simple: leave no one behind. Before I tell you how I brought their vacation to an abrupt end and held them accountable in the most unforgettable way possible, take a moment to drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you believe family is defined by love rather than blood, hit that like button and subscribe. The red numbers on my digital alarm clock read 2:03 a.m. In my line of work, or at least the work I used to do, sleep was a luxury, not a right. You learn to wake up completely in a split second. No grogginess. No taking time to rub your eyes. When the phone on my nightstand vibrated against the wood, my mind was already fully sharp before my hand even touched the receiver. I figured it was a wrong number, or maybe some automated spam caller. The last thing I expected was the sound of a child trying desperate to hold back her tears. "Grandpa." It was barely a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. It was Mia, my 8-year-old granddaughter. Her voice was shaking so badly that every syllable trembled. "Mia," I said, sitting upright as the bedsheet slid down to my waist. "Why are you whispering? What's going on?" "Grandpa, I'm really thirsty." Confusion hit me first. Thirsty? Why was she calling me at 2 in the morning because she needed a glass of water? Her bedroom was just down the hallway from her parents' room. Austin and Monica were heavy sleepers, but they weren't deaf. "Sweetheart, go ask your dad to get you some water. It's late." "I can't go." Her voice broke, yielding a frail, heartbreaking sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "The doors are locked, Grandpa. All of them." "What do you mean, the doors are locked?" "The front door, the back door, and the garage door." I knocked on Mommy and Daddy's door, but nobody answered. "I think they left, Grandpa. It's really dark, and I hear noises in the basement." I'm scared. My blood ran cold. It was a physical reaction, like someone had pushed ice water straight through my veins. I didn't ask any more questions, and I didn't ask her to go double-check. I knew something was wrong. A man develops a sense for when a situation has turned south. It's an instinct. Listening to that instinct had kept me alive through 30 years in the military, and right now it was screaming at me. "Listen to me, Mia," I said, jumping out of bed, holding the phone with one hand while pulling on my pants with the other. "I want you to go into your closet, grab your blanket, pull the door shut, and sit inside. Do not come out until you hear my voice. Do you understand?" "Okay, Grandpa. I'm going right now." "Stay on the line if you want to, but keep completely quiet." I didn't even put on socks. I shoved my feet into my boots, grabbed my keys, and paused for just a second. I pulled open the top drawer of my nightstand and grabbed my Sig Sauer. I checked the chamber. It was ready. I didn't know what was waiting for me at Austin's house. Maybe a break-in, maybe an injury. But if anyone in that house was terrifying my granddaughter, I wasn't going to settle it with a handshake. A drive that normally took 20 minutes took me 12. My pickup tore through the quiet suburban streets, bypassing every stop sign after verifying the intersections were clear. The phone sat on the passenger seat, the line open, but dead silent. With every mile I drove, my mind raced. Austin was my son. He was weak. He had always been weak, caring far too much about what other people thought of him. But Monica, my daughter-in-law, was different. She had a coldness hidden behind a warm smile. I pulled into their driveway, my headlights cutting across the front of the house. Complete darkness. Not even the porch light was on. But the most alarming detail was the driveway itself. It was empty. Austin's SUV was gone, and Monica's sedan was gone too. The silence coming from the house felt heavier than the dark. I cut the engine, grabbed the spare key from my glove box, and ran up to the front door. My hand tightening on the grip of the tool in my pocket, I unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Mia," I called out. My voice echoed in the entryway. Silence. I flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. Power was off. Not a neighborhood blackout, but deliberately cut off. I could see the main breaker in the kitchen had been flipped down. Who cuts off the electricity while leaving a child inside? I turned on my phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through the stagnant air. The house felt completely abandoned, carrying that distinct atmosphere of a place where life had just stopped. I started toward the stairs, then remembered my instructions. The closet. I took the steps 2 at a time, heading straight for Mia's room. It was the smallest bedroom in the house. The guest room was bigger, the home office was bigger, and Leo's room, their biological son, was twice the size, packed with every toy imaginable. Mia's room was practically bare, just a bed and a dresser. "Mia, it's Grandpa." The closet door creaked open. A tiny figure emerged from the shadows, tightly clutching a worn-out teddy bear with a torn ear and loose stuffing. I recognized it right away. I had bought it for her 3 years ago on the day her adoption went through. It was the only toy in her room. She lunged forward, clinging to me, trembling so hard, her teeth were clicking together. I put my gear away and lifted her up. She felt unnaturally light, like a little bird that hadn't eaten in days. "Shh! Grandpa's here." I held her tightly, feeling her tears soak through my flannel shirt. "You're safe now." I carried her downstairs, needing to get a handle on what was going on. Where were they? People don't just disappear into thin air. I walked into the kitchen, the flashlight beam sweeping across Monica's prized marble countertops. That was when I saw it. A sheet of yellow notepad paper taped to the refrigerator door. My hands shook as I peeled it off and shined the light on the writing. It was in Monica's signature cursive handwriting, the kind she used for thank you cards. "Mia, we took Leo to his baseball travel camp. This was last minute. We'll be gone for 2 weeks. There's bread on the counter. Do not go outside. If the neighbors see you wandering around, they will call the authorities, and you will be taken somewhere terrible. Be good. We'll be watching you on the cameras." I stared at the note. Travel camp. 2 weeks. I looked over at the counter. There was a single loaf of white bread. I reached out and touched the bag. It was hard as a rock, with green mold creeping along the crust. A surge of pure, focused anger washed over me, so intense it was nearly blinding. This wasn't neglect. This was deliberate cruelty. They had left an 8-year-old child entirely on her own for 2 weeks, with nothing but spoiled bread, threatening her that seeking help would get her taken away. I turned my attention to the refrigerator and tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. I pointed the flashlight at the handles. A heavy-duty bicycle chain was wrapped tightly around the double doors, secured with a heavy padlock. I looked back at Mia, who was still holding onto my neck for dear life. "Sweetheart, why is the fridge locked?" I asked, keeping my tone as gentle as possible. "Mommy said, I stole food," she whispered. "She said I eat too much, and that's why groceries are so expensive. She said the food inside was for Leo because he's growing and that I should just be thankful to have a roof over my head." I set Mia down on a kitchen stool. "Stay right here, sweetheart." I walked out to my truck, pulled a pair of heavy bolt cutters from my toolbox, and headed back inside. With a sharp snap, the metal link gave way, echoing through the empty house as the heavy chain hit the floor. I pulled open the refrigerator doors. Because the power was off, the interior light didn't turn on, but my flashlight revealed everything. It was packed to the brim. Steaks, fresh fruit, milk juice, containers of yogurt, and a birthday cake decorated with the words, "Happy Vacation." They hadn't locked it up to save his money. They had locked it up to keep food completely out of her reach. I grabbed a bottle of water, twisted off the cap, and handed it to Mia. She drank it down frantically, gasping for air when she finished. "Let's go," I told her. "Go grab your bag. Actually, don't worry about packing anything. We'll buy you brand new clothes, better clothes. Leave all of this behind." I drove her back to my house. The drive back felt entirely different. The panic was gone, replaced by an intense, laser-focused mindset. The exact kind of focus I used to rely on when mapping out supply lines in high-risk territories. I made her a bowl of tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich. She ate like it was the best meal she had ever tasted, and with every bite she took, another nail was driven into the coffin of my relationship with my son. Once she was fast asleep in the guest room, wrapped in a clean duvet, I stepped into my office. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat at my mahogany desk and opened my laptop. I needed to know where they were. Travel camp was a lie. Austin hated baseball, and Leo didn't even play. I logged in social media. Austin's profile was completely blank. He was smart enough to keep a low profile, but Monica was a different story. She couldn't function without posting online. Her entire life was a performance, and she needed an audience. I opened her Instagram. Her profile was public. Sure enough, there was a post from 4 hours ago. A picture of the three of them. Austin in a linen shirt, Leo holding a gaming console, and Monica wearing a designer outfit, holding a glass of champagne. The background was unmistakable. Massive water slides, an ocean view. The caption read, "Peace at last. Royal Caribbean icon of the seas. 15 days of pure bliss with my boys. No distractions. Just us. Family first, luxury living, blessed. No distractions." That was what she considered Mia. A distraction. I zoomed in on the photo. They looked happy, completely relaxed, smiling brightly, like people who thought they could walk away from their responsibilities without any consequences. I picked up my phone and called the airline. Having maintained top-tier loyalty status for 20 years, I knew how to navigate these systems. I told the representative I was Austin's father, looking to confirm their return flight details so I could pick them up, and provided his date of birth. It breached standard protocols, but the agent sounded exhausted, and my tone left no room for hesitation. "Oh yes, Mr. Slater," the agent said. "Tickets for Austin, Monica, and Leo Slater were booked 6 months ago. Round trip from Miami. First class. 6 months." I hung up the phone, my hand gripping the mouse so tightly the plastic creaked. This wasn't a sudden decision, nor was it an emergency. They had planned this out half a year in advance. For 6 full months, they sat at the dinner table with Mia, knowing full well they intended to discard her like an unwanted piece of trash. They saved up, booked the tickets, and likely bought that chain weeks in advance. I glanced at the wall calendar. It was Tuesday. The cruise ship had left Port Miami just yesterday, and their first port of call was Nassau in the Bahamas tomorrow morning. I took one final look at the photo of my son. He looked like me, same eyes, same jawline, but he lacked backbone. He was a coward who let his wife mistreat a child simply because going along with it was easier than standing up to her. I closed my laptop. The gentle, easygoing grandfather who just wanted everyone to get along was gone. Logistics Commander Bill Slater was back. I opened my safe, reaching past the stacks of bonds and property deeds to the very back where I kept emergency funds. It was a thick stack of $100 bills bound by rubber bands. My operational reserve. I counted out $10,000, then added another $10,000. I'm not just going to protect Mia, I whispered to the empty room. I am going to put an end to their vacation. I am going to hold them accountable. And then I am bringing my granddaughter home for good. I booked 2 one-way tickets to Nassau. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky a deep red. It felt fitting. The automatic sliding doors pulled open, and the overwhelming noise of the airport terminal hit me instantly. Crying infants, the clatter of rolling suitcases sliding across the tile, and muffled flight delay announcements coming over the intercom. To most people, it was a chaotic mess, but to me, it was just another logistical puzzle waiting to be solved. I held tightly onto Mia's hand. Her palm was sweating. She was wearing a pink shirt we had grabbed from a 24-hour store on our way to the airport, since we left all her old things back at that house. It was a bit oversized, but she was clean and taken care of, and that was what mattered. We got into the check-in line, which snaked around barrier ropes for what felt like miles. Above us, the digital boards flashed flight updates. Miami to Nassau, departing in 2 hours. Time was tight, but in my experience, the best operations were the ones that gave you no time to overthink. I looked down at Mia. She was staring at her shoes, avoiding eye contact with the crowd. "Grandpa, are you sure we can afford this?" she asked softly. Mommy said airplane tickets cost $1 million. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Your mother was lying, Mia. We're going. When we finally reached the counter, the customer service agent looked exhausted. Her name tag read Sarah, and she looked like she had already been yelled at 5 times that morning. I gave her my most professional, polite smile, the kind I used to save for generals and officials. 2 one-way tickets to Nassau, please. First class, if you have it. Mia's eyes went wide. First class? To her, that was something from a movie, not real life. Sarah typed away on her keyboard, her long nails clicking against the keys. She requested my passport and Mia's birth certificate, which I fortunately kept secure in my own safe. I handed them over along with my metal credit card, a card with a limit higher than most annual salaries. I had built my credit with the same strict discipline I used to build my career. Balance always cleared, never late. Sarah swiped the card and waited. I watched her closely, picking up on the tiny shift in her expression before she even spoke. She gave a subtle frown and tilted her head. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. The transaction was declined. The words hung in the air. Behind me, a man in a suit let out an audible sigh and checked his watch. I felt a slow heat rise at the back of my neck. "Please try it again," I said calmly. "There must be an error." That account has no balance. She nodded and swiped it, once more, this time manually entering the numbers before hitting enter. After a long pause, she looked up at me with an expression that was worse than annoyance at naught. It was pity. Sir, it was declined again. It says, do not honor. You might want to get in touch with your bank. The man behind me grumbled. Look, buddy, if you can't pay for the ticket, move aside. Some of us have places to be. I turned around slowly, keeping my voice completely level, and gave him a look I used to reserve for fresh recruits who forgot to polish their boots. It was a look that made it clear I had survived far worse than a missed flight. And he shouldn't push his luck. He shut his mouth immediately and looked back down at his phone. I stepped to the side of the counter, but I didn't leave. Mia was shaking beside me. Grandpa, did I do something wrong? She whispered. No, sweetheart. It's just a computer issue. Stay right here next to me. I pulled out my phone and dialed the priority support number on the back of the card. It picked up on the first ring. This is William Slater. Authorization code Zulu Tango 9. Why was my transaction declined? Mr. Slater. The voice on the line sounded polished and professional. We placed a hold on the account due to unusual activity. We noticed a major cash withdrawal at a branch counter yesterday afternoon that depleted your available liquid credit. Since it was processed in person, we assumed it was you, but the subsequent travel attempt flagged our risk systems. I froze. A cash withdrawal? In person? I didn't withdraw any cash, I said, my voice dropping an octave. How much? $25,000, sir. Processed at the Main Street branch. The teller verified the signature on file. I closed my eyes. The Main Street branch. That was where Austin worked. He wasn't just a customer there, he was the branch manager. He knew the tellers, he knew the procedures, and he knew exactly how to replicate my signature, having practiced it on report cards throughout his school years. That betrayal cut far deeper than the financial loss. This wasn't just theft. It was a deliberate move to cut off my resources. He had drained available funds to finance his own luxury trip, making sure that even if I discovered what happened to Mia, I would be left completely stranded and unable to take action. He thought he had me trapped, cutting off my supply line completely. But he forgot who he was dealing with. Sir, would you like to dispute the transaction? The banker asked. No, I replied coldly. Leave it for now. I'll handle this myself. Here is the next part of the story, continuing the natural, immersive American voiceover narrative, optimized for long-form YouTube standard and completely safe for speech synthesis. I hung up the phone and looked back at Sarah, the customer service agent. She was already motioning for the rude businessman behind me to step forward. Excuse me, I said, stepping right back in front of him. I'm not finished. Sir, if the card is declined, there's really nothing I can do, Sarah said, her patience clearly wearing thin. I didn't argue, and I didn't beg. Instead, I knelt down on one knee right there on the polished airport floor. Mia gave me a confused look, while the businessman let out a sarcastic chuckle. Look at this, he sneered. The old guy is getting down on his knees to pray. I ignored him entirely. I reached down toward my left boot. It was a habit I picked up during my very first deployment back in the 70s. In a zone like that, you never rely on banks, and you never trust pockets that can easily be picked. You trust your boots. I unbuckled the strap and reached deep into the ankle lining to a hidden pocket I had hand-stitched myself years ago. I pulled out a thick envelope, wrapped tightly in plastic. I stood back up and dropped it onto the counter. The heavy thud it made instantly shut the businessman up. I tore open the plastic. Inside was a thick stack of $100 bills, crisp, fresh, and uncirculated. My emergency fund, my operational reserve. I counted out the bills right there on the desk. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. I kept counting until the pile on the counter looked like a seized haul from a high-profile operation. "I believe this is legal tender," I said, keeping my tone completely even. "2 first-class tickets to Nassau. I'd like window seats." Sarah stared at the cash, then looked up at me, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir." She began counting the bills, her hands trembling slightly. The rude businessman went completely silent. I turned to glance at him and he suddenly found the pattern on the ceiling tiles utterly fascinating. I looked down at Mia. She was staring wide-eyed at the cash, then back up at me. "Grandpa, why do you keep money in your shoe?" "Because banks make mistakes, Mia," I said, raising my voice just enough for the people around us to hear clearly. "And because sometimes the people you trust the most will steal from you. But you never let that stop you from finishing what you set out to do. Understand?" She gave me a serious, deliberate nod. Sarah handed over our boarding passes, her attitude completely transformed. There was genuine respect in her eyes now, or maybe a little bit of fear. Either way, it didn't matter to me. "Thank you, Mr. Slater. Have a safe flight." I took the passes, grabbed Mia's hand, and we headed straight for security. I could feel the weight of the remaining cash pressed against my ankle. It wasn't comfortable, but it gave me a deep sense of readiness. It felt like holding ammunition. Austin thought he had disarmed me. He thought he had left me stranded without options. But all he had done was push me right back into my element. I wasn't just a grandfather anymore. I was a veteran heading into an operational zone, and I had just secured our transport. The sun's mine. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime, sounding like the bell at the start of a brand new round. We were cruising smoothly at 30,000 feet, leaving the gray clouds of the East Coast far behind as we cut through the bright, endless blue of the upper atmosphere. I adjusted my seat, leaning back slightly, to relieve the dull ache in my lower back. A stiffness brought on less by age and more by the intense stress of the last 12 hours. Next to me, Mia sat stiffly in her leather chair. In first class, the seats were wide and deep, designed to make you forget you were flying through the air inside a metal tube. But Mia looked entirely swallowed up by hers. Her legs hung a few inches off the floor, her new sneakers vibrating gently with the hum of the aircraft. She hadn't let go of the armrests since takeoff. Knuckles turned completely white. A flight attendant made her way down the aisle. She was an older woman with graying hair and a warm, genuine smile that usually put people at ease. She stopped her cart beside our row, bringing along the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and warm pastries. "Good morning, Mr. Slater," she said, checking her tablet. "And good morning to you, little lady. Can I get you two something to drink? We have fresh orange juice, apple juice, sparkling water, or hot chocolate. And we'll have warm, freshly baked cookies ready in just a minute." I looked over at Mia, expecting her face to light up. Any 8-year-old child I had ever known would jump at the chance for hot cookies and sweet drinks. But Mia didn't smile. She pulled back instead. It was a tiny, subtle movement, but I caught it immediately. She shrank back into the large leather seat, pressing herself into the cushions as if trying to make herself invisible. "No, thank you," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the background hum of the engines. I frowned slightly. Sweetheart, you haven't had anything to eat since that grilled cheese sandwich hours ago. Have some juice. Get a cookie. Mia shook her head firmly, her dark hair falling across her face. I'm not hungry, Grandpa. I'm okay. I'm okay. Right on cue. Her stomach let out a loud, undeniable growl. The clear sound of an empty stomach betraying her polite refusal. The flight attendant smiled gently, careful not to make her feel uncomfortable. I'll just leave a few snacks right here on the console for you, she said softly, setting down a bowl of warm mixed nuts and a glass of apple juice. Just in case you change your mind. She continued down the aisle. I waited until she was out of earshot, before turning in my seat to face my granddaughter. I reached out and covered her small, trembling hand with my own, a rough, calloused hand, shaped by decades of service and hard labor. Her hand felt fragile, cool, and damp with nervous sweat. Mia, look at me, I said, keeping my voice soft but firm. Why are you trying to hide how you feel from me? I know you're hungry. Why did you say no? She stared down at her lap, nervously biting her lip as her fingers picked at a loose thread on her jeans. Because it costs money, Grandpa, she finally whispered. Her voice was so quiet, I had to lean in to catch the words. I leaned back in my seat, entirely taken aback. Sweetheart, I bought the tickets. The food is included. You don't have to pay anything extra for it. She shook her head again, tears welling up in her eyes. No, Grandpa. Mommy said nothing is ever free. She told me that whenever we go anywhere, I have to be careful, because I'm expensive. She said they couldn't afford a nice boat like the neighbors because adopting me cost so much money. She said every time I ask for special things like juice or snacks, I'm taking money away from the family. She said, if I'm not careful, we won't be able to pay the electric bill, the lights will be shut off, and it'll all be my fault. Hearing those words felt like getting the air knocked clean out of my lungs. It was a heavy physical blow, far worse than any punch I had taken during military drills or old scuffles. This wasn't just physical neglect. It was psychological manipulation. Monica wasn't just depriving Mia of basic food, she was actively poisoning the child's mind, placing the weight of the family's financial stability squarely on the shoulders of an 8-year-old girl. I turned to stare out the window at the endless white clouds below, fighting hard to keep my rising anger under control. My mind flashed back to the receipts I had seen in Austin's office while helping him with his taxes last year. Monica's designer handbags easily ran $3,000 each. Austin's golf club membership cost $500 a month. They drove luxury cars and drank expensive wines. Yet, they looked this little girl in the eye and told her a $3 juice was the reason money was tight. They were conditioning her, making her feel like an unwanted burden who should be grateful for any crumbs handed to her. They were teaching her to minimize her own presence, to ask for nothing, and to apologize for simply existing. I turned back to Mia, unbuckling my seatbelt so I could turn toward her completely. I wrapped both of her small hands in mine and waited until she met my eyes. Mia, listen to me very carefully, I said. Every single word I am about to tell you is the absolute truth. You know how Grandpa used to manage supplies and resources for thousands of soldiers? I handled millions of dollars in equipment. I know exactly what things cost. She sniffled, wiping away a tear, and nodded slowly. Your mother lied to you. Mia's eyes went wide. She can't lie. Lying is wrong. She lied, I repeated firmly. You are not expensive. You are not a burden. The reason they didn't have a boat is because your father lost money making poor investments he didn't understand. The reason they complained about bills is because your mother bought designer clothes she didn't need just to impress people she doesn't even like. None of that has anything to do with you. Having a cookie or drinking a glass of juice is never going to make the lights get turned off. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She still looked hesitant. But Mommy said. Mommy was wrong, I interrupted gently. And Mommy isn't here right now. I am. Let me tell you how this flight works. Do you see this seat? Do you see this glass of juice? It's already paid for. Settled. If you drink it, it's paid for. If you don't touch it, it's still paid for. You cannot waste my money because I have already spent it on you. And I was happy to do it. Grandpa has plenty of resources, Mia. If I wanted to, I could buy every single cookie on this entire airplane. A faint, subtle smile cracked through her tearful expression. The whole plane? The whole plane, I assured her. So here is the new rule. For the next 2 weeks, while we finish what we set out to do. You are not allowed to look at a price tag, and you are not allowed to worry about a bill. Your only job is to be an 8-year-old girl. Your job is to eat when you're hungry, rest when you're, and play when you're bored. I will handle everything else. I will handle the finances. I will handle the lights. And I will deal with your parents. I picked up the glass of apple juice and held it out to her. Drink it, I instructed gently. She hesitated for a split second before her thirst took over. She took the glass with both hands and drank every last drop, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand when she finished. Good girl, I said. Now, press that blue button on your armrest. What does it do? She asked. Just press it. She pressed the button, and a moment later, the attendant returned to our row. How can I help you, sir? Need anything else? My granddaughter would like a warm chocolate chip cookie, I said. Actually, make it 2. And another juice. Do you happen to have ice cream back there? We have vanilla bean sundaes topped with warm fudge, she replied warmly. We'll take one of those too, I said, looking over at Mia. How does that sound? Mia looked from the attendant back to me, seeing the absolute determination in my eyes. She could tell I wasn't upset with her. I was standing up for her. Yes, please, she whispered. When the food arrived, Mia dug in with a level of intensity that broke my heart. She ate the cookies, enjoyed the ice cream, and finished the nuts. With every bite, I could see the tension leaving her tiny shoulders. The frightened, guarded posture was fading away, letting the real child beneath finally come out. I leaned back in my seat, watching her scrape up the last bit of fudge from the bowl, making a quiet vow to myself. They had spent years making her feel worthless. I had 2 weeks to set the record straight. Mia, I called softly. She looked up, a bit of chocolate on her cheek. Yeah, Grandpa. I want you to remember this feeling right now. Feeling full, safe, and cared for. Because from here on out, this is how your life is going to be. Nobody is ever going to lock food away from you again. Nobody is ever going to tell you that you're too expensive to be loved. Not while I still have breath in my body. She studied my face for a long moment, looking for any sign of hesitation. Then she gave a slow, trusting nod. Okay, Grandpa. Just then, the aircraft hit a patch of mild turbulence, dipping slightly as the seatbelt sign chimed back on. Mia gasped, reaching out quickly to grab my arm. I held her hand tightly, staying completely steady. I was her anchor, and I wasn't going anywhere. This minor rough patch was just the beginning. The real confrontation was waiting for us in Nassau, and I was fully prepared to walk right into it. The moment we stepped out of the air-conditioned terminal, the thick Nassau humidity hit us like a heavy blanket. It wasn't the pleasant warmth of a tropical getaway. It was a smothering heat mixed with fumes, warm asphalt, and the dense crowd of people packed into the port area. We flagged a taxi to take us down to the cruise docks. The driver tried to make conversation about the weather and local shops, but I kept my focus sharp, watching the colorful island scenery pass by the window while holding Mia's hand in the back seat. My mind was strictly on the timeline. Icon of the Seas had docked early at 7 a.m. and was scheduled to set sail again at 5 p.m. It was currently 11:30 a.m. That gave us under 6 hours to locate them, face them directly, and leave before the vessel headed back out to open water. When we pulled up to Prince George Wharf, the place was absolute chaos. Thousands of passengers were pouring off the ships like a disturbed nest, wearing matching vacation clothes, their skin already turning red under the intense sun. The noise was constant, steel drum music blending with tour guides shouting and buses honking their horns. I held tightly onto Mia's hand, noticing her fingers clutching mine tightly. "Stay close to me," I told her. "Do not let go under any circumstances. If we somehow get separated, stay right where you are and call out for me. Got it?" She nodded, wide-eyed from the sensory overload, looking entirely small amidst the surging crowd. We worked our way through the sea of people toward the primary security checkpoint for the Royal Caribbean terminal. This was our first real obstacle. You don't just walk onto a cruise ship. It's essentially a floating compound with metal detectors, screening gear, and staff who take access control very seriously. I approached the main entrance where a tall guard in a crisp white uniform raised a hand to block our path. He looked worn out and entirely uninterested in hearing excuses. "ID and SeaPass cards, please," he said mechanically, without even looking up. "I don't have a SeaPass," I said, raising my voice over the noise of the terminal. "I need to secure day passes for the vessel." He let out a short, dry chuckle. "Day passes are sold online months in advance, sir. Ship is at full capacity. Unless you're a registered guest or crew, you can't cross this line. Please step aside, you're blocking the queue." I didn't budge. My feet stayed planted right where they were. Having navigated checkpoints from military zones to secure facilities, I knew every barrier had a process, and usually, that process opened up with absolute confidence and the right leverage. "I'm not a tourist," I said, taking a step closer so he had to look me in the eye. "My son is on that ship, and he took something that belongs to me. I need 2 hours on board. I am prepared to pay the premium access fee." "Look, sir," the guard sighed, resting his hands on his belt. "I don't care who is on that ship. No pass, no entry. Step back now, or I'll have to call port security." Mia tugged nervously at my shirt from behind. "Grandpa, let's go. He's scary." I looked at the guard, then watched the steady stream of passengers scanning their plastic cards to walk right through. I knew that following standard procedure was fine when you had time, but time was the one thing I didn't have. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my money clip, peeled off $500 bills, folded them tightly in my palm, and leaned in closer. "Listen to me carefully. I'm a military veteran carrying cash, accompanied by a frightened child. I am not a risk to your vessel. I am simply a grandfather here to resolve a serious matter. Tell me where the duty F manager for VIP is located. I know every vessel reserves allocations for late arrivals, local officials, and urgent family matters." I slipped the neatly folded bills into his hand, a smooth, natural motion refined over decades of dealing with strict gatekeepers in complex situations. He glanced down at his hand, then looked at Mia, taking in her nervous expression, before looking back at the resolve in my eyes. The rigid, bureaucratic wall in his posture softened just a bit. "Head to the blue tent on the far left," he muttered quietly, pointing away from the main crowd. "Ask for Mr. Henderson. Tell him you're looking for a temporary guest pass. But if he asks, you didn't get that from me." "Understood," I said. I guided Mia away from the main line and walked straight toward the blue tent. Mr. Henderson turned out to be an ambitious young manager in a sharp suit who looked like he was eager to climb the corporate ladder. He started giving me the standard speech about ship capacity. But as soon as I placed $2,000 in cash on his desk for temporary visitor credentials, he managed to find an administrative exception in his system. Processing the badges, scanning our passports, and getting temporary clearance took 20 long minutes. Finally, he handed over 2 lanyards holding plastic visitor passes. "These credentials are valid until 4:30 p.m. sharp," he warned. "If you aren't off the ship by then, you'll be taking an unscheduled trip to Mexico." I placed the lanyard over Mia's neck. It hung quite low on her small frame. We walked down the long, covered gangway as heat radiated off the concrete below. Then, as the gangway opened up, the full scale of the ship came into view. Icon of the seas. It wasn't just a ship. It was a massive, floating city. A towering monument to pure indulgence. It rose 20 decks high, completely blocking out the sun, painted in bright white and teal, with massive water slides twisting around the upper decks. It was huge, loud, and flashy. Exactly the kind of place someone like Austin would use to pretend the real world didn't exist. I stared up at the thousands of balconies lining the side of the hull. Somewhere inside that massive structure, my son was enjoying drinks bought with money meant for his daughter's future. Somewhere in there, they were laughing without a care in the world. I adjusted my sunglasses, checked my watch, 12:15 p.m., and looked down at Mia, who was staring up at the vessel with her mouth slightly open. "Are they really in there, Grandpa?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "They're in there." "Are we going to yell at them?" "No." I took her hand and led her toward the boarding ramp. "We aren't going to make a scene. Raising a voice is what people do when they don't have a plan. We are here to hold them accountable." We stepped onto the metal ramp, our boots clicking firmly against the steel plates. We were stepping onto the vessel. The search was over. The confrontation was about to begin. The main dining hall, on deck 15, was a monument to overindulgence. They called it the Windjammer Buffet, but it felt more like a massive, endless feast designed by corporate accountants. The air was thick with the rich scent of garlic butter, carved meats, and the sugary smell of artificial tropical drinks. A complete overload for the senses. Everywhere you looked, there were literal mountains of food. Chilled shrimp pyramids, glistening under warm lamps. Carving stations where chefs sliced thick cuts of prime rib, and dessert towers that seemed to defy gravity. I kept a firm grip on Mia's hand. As we navigated the crowded of tables. She walked with a slight hesitation, completely overwhelmed by the sight around her. Her eyes darted nervously between the overflowing plates of strangers and the floor below. Just days ago, she was trying to survive on a single ruined loaf of bread. And now she was walking through a room where people were casually scraping half-eaten steaks directly into the trash. The sheer waste was appalling, a physical manifestation of the exact kind of entitlement that had put my granddaughter in danger. I scanned the vast room. It was packed, but finding them wasn't going to be difficult. You just had to look for the center of attention. Or rather, the people desperately trying to create one. I spotted the ring light first, a portable LED light ring, clamped right onto the edge of a prime table near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Naturally, they had taken the best seat in the house. The bright light was aimed straight at a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing a white linen dress that likely cost more than my truck's entire maintenance budget for the year. Monica. She was holding a glass of rosé in one hand, gesturing dramatically with the other as she spoke animatedly to her phone screen. She was performing broadcast style, selling the picture-perfect image of a devoted mother enjoying a well-deserved luxury break. Sitting across from her was Austin, my son. He wore an unbuttoned tropical shirt, looking sunburnt and visibly out of shape. His face flushed red from alcohol as he laughed loudly at whatever Monica was saying to her online audience. In front of him sat a massive silver platter, taking up half the table, a giant, bright, red steamed lobster, surrounded by mussels and ears of corn. And then there was Leo, my 10-year-old grandson. He was slumped at the end of the table, staring fixedly down at a tablet screen with noise-canceling headphones over his ears, completely tuning out his parents. A plate of cold chicken tenders and fries sat untouched in front of him. He looked utterly bored and completely disengaged. I felt a sudden squeeze on my hand and stopped. Mia had frozen in her tracks, staring at the table as her lower lip began to tremble. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Is that Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said quietly. "That's him. Is he going to be mad at us for being here?" I dropped down on one knee right in the middle of the crowded walkway, completely blocking a guest carrying a plate of nachos. I looked Mia straight in the eyes. "He doesn't have the right to be angry, Mia. The only thing he should feel right now is shame. You stay right behind me, don't say a word, and just watch." I stood up, straightened my shirt, and felt the outline of the yellow note resting safely in my pocket. The paper felt as heavy as lead. We stepped forward. I approached them from behind Austin's chair. The ambient noise of the crowded dining hall was loud. But, as I closed the distance, everything else seemed to fade away. The only sound left was Monica's voice, sharp, high-pitched, and completely artificial, carrying that specific tone people use when speaking to pets or for a social media audience. "We are just so truly blessed, everyone," she said directly into her camera. "Austin and I have been working tirelessly, and we really needed this time to recenter ourselves as a couple. Prioritizing self-care is just so vital. After all, how can you pour into others if your own cup is completely empty, right?" She took a sip of her wine and let out a light laugh. Austin reached down, grabbing a lobster claw and snapping it open with a loud crunch that sounded like a small firecracker. Juices splattered onto his chin, which he wiped away with a cloth napkin while laughing along. "Now this is living, babe," he said loudly. "This is the life." They were so completely absorbed in their own self-indulgent bubble that they didn't even notice a 68-year-old man holding the hand of a quiet little girl, Jan, standing less than 2 feet away. They didn't notice my shadow falling across their table, blocking out the bright Bahamian sunlight. I waited, letting them finish their thought, letting them drown completely in their own performance before I shattered it entirely. Monica smiled broadly into her phone. "Of course. We miss the kids terribly, but sometimes you just have to." She froze mid-sentence, her eyes drifting past the top of her phone, landing directly on me. Here is the continuation of the narrative, maintaining the natural American voiceover standard, complete emotional weight, and fully compliant with AI speech safety guidelines. Her smile didn't fade right away. It froze, twisting into a sudden spasm of utter confusion. Her mind simply couldn't process the reality in front of her. Bill Slater was supposed to be in Florida. Bill Slater was an old man who went to sleep at 9 o'clock every night. There was no way Bill Slater was standing on the upper deck of Icon of the Seas, looking like absolute doom. "Dad," Austin choked out. He dropped his lobster claw, the hard shell clattering loudly against the fine china plate. I didn't say a single word, not yet. Words were far too light for a moment like this. I needed an action. Something they couldn't simply edit out or explain away. I reached slowly into my jacket pocket, my movements deliberate and steady. Austin winced, recoiling as if I were pulling out a weapon. In a very real sense, I was. I pulled out the yellow piece of notepad paper, the jagged edges still holding traces of tape from where I had torn it off the refrigerator door. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing it out in my hands. Monica's phone was still recording. The live comments were likely racing across her screen, with thousands of viewers asking who this furious older man was. She didn't move to stop the stream. She sat there completely paralyzed. I took one step forward and slammed the paper down right in the middle of Austin's plate. It landed directly on top of the steaming lobster tail, the melted butter immediately soaking into the yellow fibers, turning them translucent. Yet the message written in Monica's sharp handwriting remained perfectly clear. "Be good." An absolute heavy silence fell over the table. Even Leo looked up from his tablet, pulling off one side of his headphones. "Grandpa?" Leo called out. "Mia?" Austin looked down at the note, then slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. The deep sunburn on his face drained away, replaced by a sickly, pale white. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish washed ashore, desperately gasping for air. I leaned down close, placing both hands firmly on the edge of the table, towering over him. I could smell the expensive cologne he was wearing, a scent used to cover up his own weakness. "I hope the lobster is good, son," I said, my voice low, but carrying the heavy weight of a sledgehammer. "I hope it tastes much better than the single loaf of moldy bread you left behind for your daughter." Monica finally found her voice. She scrambled frantically to grab her phone to cut the feed, but her hands were shaking so violently that she dropped it. The phone landed face up on the table, its camera still broadcasting straight toward the ceiling. "What are you doing here?" she shrieked. The polished facade of the perfect mother shattered completely, revealing the cornered, desperate person beneath. "You can't be here. This is a private family trip. Security! Someone call security!" I let out a cold, sharp laugh. "Go ahead, Monica, call them. In fact, I'd prefer if you called them right now, because I have full video footage on my phone of how you chained that refrigerator shut. I'm sure the local authorities, along with the thousands of people watching your little broadcast right now, would be very interested to take a look." Austin pushed himself up, knocking his chair over backward. "Dad, please, don't do this here. Everyone is watching." "Sit down," I barked. It was the exact tone I used when commanding troops in the field. Austin sat down instantly, collapsing into his seat like a puppet with its strings cut. I motioned for Mia to step forward. She moved out from behind me, holding her worn teddy bear tightly against her chest. She looked so small against the vast backdrop of the ocean, but she stood her ground. "Look at her, Austin," I said, pointing directly at Mia. "Look at your daughter. You told her you were taking Leo to a camp. You told her bringing her along was too expensive. You left her in the dark to fend for herself while you sat here cracking open seafood and enjoying fine wine." Austin couldn't bring himself to look at her, staring fixes at the tablecloth instead. "I didn't realize, Dad," he muttered weakly. "Monica said she arranged for someone to check in. She said everything was taken care of." "Lie!" I slammed my hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "I saw your messages, Austin. I saw the bank records where you forged my signature to take money out just to pay for this luxury trip. You knew exactly what you were doing. You took my funds and you abandoned her." I picked up the platter, butter dripping onto the white linen tablecloth, and held it up, taking in the absurd luxury of it all. Then I looked at the yellow note sticking to the food. "Be good." I read the words out loud for everyone nearby to hear. I set the platter down hard on the table. The plate cracked right down the middle, the sharp sound echoing through the surrounding dining area. The casual chatter around us died down instantly. Heads turned from every direction, and the entire room fell dead quiet. "We are taking Leo," I said firmly. "And we are taking Mia. You two can finish your meal. But when you get back to Florida, I guarantee there will be a legal outcome waiting for you that you won't be able to run from." I turned toward Leo. "Pack your things, son. We're moving to another room." Leo didn't hesitate for a single second. He grabbed his tablet, stood up, walked around the table, and stood right beside Mia. He didn't even look back at his parents. Austin buried his face in his hands. Monica stared blankly at the shattered plate, where the yellow note floated in a pool of butter and broken china. "Enjoy the rest of your cruise," I said coldly. Taking Mia's hand in my left and Leo's in my right, I turned my back on the ocean view and walked away from that table, leaving them standing amidst the ruin of their own selfish choices. The suffocating silence that followed the cracking of that plate lasted for 3 full seconds. In the military, we used to call that the pause before the storm. That brief, breathless moment where the reality of an ambush sets in right before survival instincts kick into overdrive. I half expected Austin to speak up, to apologize, to plead, or even to lash out, but he did nothing. He just shrank into his patterned shirt like a spineless jellyfish, a man terrified of facing consequences. Monica, however, was no jellyfish. She was a viper, and I had just stepped directly on her ego in front of her online audience. She didn't start crying right away. First, her eyes narrowed. She glanced at her phone, still recording face-up on the table, and then looked around at the dumbfounded faces of the nearby diners. She realized her carefully crafted image of the perfect family was crumbling fast. She had 2 choices: admit to what she had done, or turn me into the aggressor. She chose to make me the villain. "Help!" she shrieked. It was a piercing, dramatic scream, designed to instantly trigger the protective instincts of everyone in the room. "He's trying to take them. He's taking my children. Someone help me, please." She lunged across the table, knocking over the ice bucket. Ice and water spilled everywhere, soaking the tablecloth and splashing onto the floor. She didn't care. It was all part of the act. She scrambled around the table toward us, grabbing Leo by the arm so tightly it visibly made him wince. "Let go of him," she hissed at me, then looked up at the gathering crowd as tears suddenly poured down her face. "Please, somebody help. He's out of his mind. He's having an episode." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Just a moment ago, I was a grandfather confronting a wrong. Now, to the uninformed bystanders, I looked like an irrational old man, trying to pull two terrified children away from a sobbing mother. I could feel the pressure rising as hostile glares directed at us from the surrounding tables. "Monica, that's enough," I said, keeping my voice low and controlled. Don't make this any worse than it already is." She ignored me completely, turning toward a heavily built traveler with sunburned shoulders at the next table. A man who looked like he had been waiting his whole life to play the hero. She sobbed hysterically. "He has severe memory loss," she cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He thinks it's 20 years ago. He broke into our home and took my daughter. Look at her. Look at how scared she is. Mia, come to mommy, sweetheart. Hurry. Don't let him hurt you." Mia froze completely. Her small hand grew sweaty in mine. She looked at Monica, then up at me. She was terrified. Not of me, but of the woman who had locked her in the dark. To the crowd, however, her fear looked like a victim being controlled. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Stay right beside me, Mia," I whispered. "Hey, pal." The sunburned traveler stepped forward, blocking my path completely. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and stepped right into my space. "Let go of the kids." I looked him dead in the eye without blinking. "Step aside, son. This is a family matter." "Doesn't look like a family matter to me. Looks like you're harassing this woman," he said, puffing out his chest. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor echoed across the room. Several other men stood up, emboldened by the first. A wall of strangers was forming between us and the exit. Dozens of phones were pulled out, recording every second. I could already see the misleading headlines in my head. I turned my focus back to Austin, who was still sitting at the table, nervously picking at his fingernails. "Austin!" I barked. "Tell them! Tell them who I am! Tell them what you did!" Austin raised his head, his eyes judiciously around the room, taking in the angry crowd, his wife's dramatic performance, and the path of least resistance. He knew that if he backed me, he admitted to a serious crime. If he backed Monica, he played the victim. "Dad, please," Austin said, his voice trembling just enough to sound like a heartbroken son. "Just let the kids go. We can get you help. I told you we'd pay for a proper care facility. You don't have to do this." That betrayal was so sharp it almost made me laugh out loud. He was doubling down, using the old line about a care facility. The very lie he had used to try and take my property. To discredit me right here. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "That's so sad. He needs professional care. That poor family." Monica saw her advantage and took it. She lunged forward, not toward Leo, but straight for Mia, reaching out to grab her by the wrist. "Keep your hands off her," I growled, stepping firmly between them. "Do not touch her." Monica shrieked and recoiled dramatically, as if I had struck her, turning toward the recording phone cameras. "Did you see that? He hit me. He just put his hands on me." I hadn't touched her at all. I had simply blocked her path. But in the court of public opinion, facts didn't matter as much as the angle of the camera. Suddenly, the dining room doors swung wide open. "Security, clear the way. Step aside." 4 uniformed officers strode into the room. These weren't the gate guards I had spoken to earlier. This was the ship's primary security detail, equipped with restraint gear and tactical radios. Moving with trained coordination, they assessed the scene in seconds. A screaming woman, upset children, an angry crowd, And at the center of it all, an older veteran, standing tall with his fists clenched. "Sir," the lead officer said, stepping forward. A thick-necked man with a radio strapped to his shoulder. His hand rested near his belt. "I need you to step away from the miners and step back from this family immediately." "I am the family," I stated calmly. "I am their grandfather. These children are in danger with these people." "Sir, I won't ask a second time. Release the children and keep your hands where I can see them." I looked down at Mia. If I refused to cooperate now, Monica would take her. They would drag her back to a room, use psychological pressure to convince her I was out of my mind. And by the time we reached Miami, their version of the story would be locked in. If I fought back physically, I would be subdued, restrained, and processed as an aggressor. I would lose all legal ground and end up looking like a violent offender. It was a complete tactical trap, and Monica knew it. She was hiding her face behind her hands, pretending to weep while watching me with a triumph in her eyes. I made a swift calculation. I had to de-escalate physically to win legally. "It's okay, Mia," I said softly, dropping down on one knee so I was eye level with her. "I am not leaving you, I promise. But I need to talk to these officers. Go stand right next to Leo. And don't let anyone take you out of this room." I let go of her hand. It felt like letting go of a lifeline. I stood up slowly and raised both hands, palms open. "I'm cooperating," I told the officer. "I am unarmed. I hold valid access credentials for this vessel." The lead officer moved in quickly, turning me around against the edge of a serving station. I felt the sharp pull of plastic restraints securing my wrists behind my back. "You're hurting him," Leo yelled out, breaking his silence and slamming his tablet onto the table. "Stop it. Grandpa didn't do anything. Mommy is lying." The crowd went quiet. The clear voice of a child always cuts through the noise. "Leo, sweetheart. Shh." Monica rushed toward him, trying to pull him close. "Grandpa is sick, honey. He isn't feeling well today. Don't listen to." "She's lying," Leo shouted, pushing her away with enough force to shock everyone standing near. We abandoned Mia. We left her locked in the house with no food. Grandpa came to save her. Monica's face drained of color completely. The sunburned traveler, who had blocked my path, looked utterly confused, staring back and forth between Leo and Monica. "What did that kid just say?" Someone in the back called out. "Officer," I spoke up, my voice steady even as I stood restrained. "Check my pocket, the front pocket of my shirt." The officer hesitated for a moment. "Do it," I instructed firmly. "Unless you want to be named in a wrongful restraint claim when the full facts come to light." The officer reached into my pocket and pulled out the yellow note. The paper stained with butter, but still entirely readable. "Read it," I said. "Read it out loud." The officer looked down at the paper, reading the handwriting. "Mia, we took Leo to his baseball travel camp. Be good. We'll be watching you on the cameras." He frowned, turning his gaze toward Monica. "Ma'am, is this your handwriting?" Monica stammered, her eyes darting around the room frantically. "No. I mean, yes. But he made me write it. He forced me. He's extremely controlling. He threatened us, which is why we had to come on this cruise to get away from him." It was a terrible lie. A desperate, absurd claim that the crowd didn't buy for a second. Nobody takes a luxury cruise to escape an aggressor while leaving a young child behind in the very house they fled. I turned my head to look directly at Austin. "Austin," I said, "this is your absolute last chance. Look at your son. Look at Leo. He's 10 years old, and he has more courage in his pinky finger than you have in your entire body. Are you going to let your wife lie to security? Are you going to let your father be restrained for protecting your daughter? Austin stared at me, sweat pouring down his face. He looked at the restraints on my wrists, then back at the security officers. Austin started, his voice cracking. "Shut up, Austin," Monica hissed. "Don't say a single word." Austin's mouth snapped shut. He lowered his head and stared blankly at his shoes. I closed my eyes. The physical discomfort of the restraints was nothing compared to the deep disappointment of that silence. My son was gone. The boy I had raised, taught to ride a bike, and coached through life was completely gone. All that remained was an empty shell, driven entirely by fear and selfishness. "Fine," I said, opening my eyes. "Officer, I have clear evidence, digital recordings. I have time-stamped security footage from their home from 2 nights ago at 9:30 p.m. I have bank transaction records showing unauthorized withdrawals used to finance this trip. And I have an audio recording of my granddaughter calling me at 2 in the morning, terrified, because her parents locked away all the food." I stared directly at Monica. The smug look on her face had vanished entirely. "I want to speak with the captain," I stated. "And I want a connection established with federal law enforcement authorities in Miami. Because this is no longer a civil disagreement. This is a severe child endangerment matter." The officer looked at the note once more, then looked at the small, frightened girl holding tight to her older brother, and finally at the woman in the designer dress, who had suddenly gone completely silent. "Take those off him," the officer ordered his partner. "But keep everyone right here. We are taking this straight to the bridge." The plastic restraints were cut, and I rubbed my wrists. I didn't celebrate, and I didn't smile. I simply walked over to Mia and Leo, placing a protective hand on each of their shoulders. "Let's go," I told them softly. Escorted by security, we walked out of the dining hall. This time, the crowd parted silently to let us through. There was no more hostility, only a heavy, uncomfortable silence as the truth began to settle in. They didn't know every detail yet, but they knew one thing for certain. The illusion was shattered, the vacation was over, and the real reckoning had just begun. The head of security held my smartphone as if it were an unexploded device. The screen had a hairline crack in the corner, a memory from when I had dropped it in my rush to get to Mia. But the display was crystal clear. I had turned the brightness all the way up, making sure every single pixel displayed their actions without a shadow of a doubt. I used my thumb to unlock the device. My hands were completely steady now. The initial surge of adrenaline from the physical confrontation had cleared, replaced by the cold, methodical focus required to complete a mission. I opened the cloud storage app connected to the home security system and select the footage recorded 2 nights prior at 9:30 p.m. "Turn the volume all the way up," I told the officer. He pressed the side volume button and pressed the side volume button, the timestamp in the corner, recording every second of their decision. It was a wide-angle view covering the kitchen and living room. In the frame, the house was fully lit, with suitcases neatly packed by the front door. Monica walked into the frame wearing a white travel outfit, looking energized and excited. In her hands, she carried a heavy length of metal chain and a padlock. Austin followed right behind her, looking visibly nervous as he paced back and forth. "Are you completely sure about this, Monica?" Austin's voice came through the speaker slightly distorted, but unmistakably his. "What if there's an emergency? What if she needs to get out?" "She'll be perfectly fine, Austin. Stop being so paranoid. Monica's voice rang out sharp and dismissive. She's not going to starve. There's a loaf of bread on the counter. After the mess she made on my rug, this is more than generous. Besides, if we leave the fridge open, she'll eat through everything. You know she has no self-control. I am not coming back to a wiped-out kitchen. On the small screen, Monica proceeded to wrap the heavy bicycle chain around the handles of the stainless steel refrigerator. The metal clanked loudly against the appliance as she pulled it tight once, twice, 3 times. Then, with a sharp click, she secured the heavy padlock, giving it a hard tug to test the hold. "Perfect," she said, dusting off her hands. "Now let's get moving. The ride is here. Make sure you lock her bedroom door from the outside. I don't want her wandering around while we're away." The video ended, and the security chief lowered the phone. He stared at the black saw screen for a long, heavy moment before raising his eyes to look directly at Monica. His expression had transformed entirely. The neutral, professional distance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated disgust, the kind of look reserved for something vile picked up on the bottom of a shoe. "Is this authentic?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Monica opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked frantically around the room, searching for an ally, searching for anyone who might still buy into her act. Position had shifted completely. The passengers who had been ready to tackle me moments ago were now staring at her in sheer horror. Mothers in the room pulled their own children closer. The sunburned traveler who had blocked my path backed far away from Austin, as if avoiding something toxic. "You locked a child inside a house," the traveler said, breaking the dead silence, his voice shaking with anger. "You chained a refrigerator shut. That was taken out of context." Monica shrieked, her voice reaching a frantic, shrill pitch under the immense pressure. "You don't understand. She has an eating issue. The doctor told us we had to strictly regulate her food. It was for her own well-being." "You're a liar," a woman at a nearby table snapped, standing up, trembling with rage. "I'm a practicing pediatrician, and no doctor on this earth would ever prescribe a padlock and a loaf of bread for an 8-year-old child. You are a monster." "Unbelievable," another voice called out. "Call the police," someone else shouted. The room erupted entirely. The quiet whispers turned into an overwhelming wave of public condemnation. Phones were raised again, but this time they weren't filming an upset grandfather. They were documenting a clear case of child endangerment. They were recording the total downfall of a self-proclaimed perfect family. Austin shrank back against the window, looking as if he wanted to sink right through the floor, pulling at his collar as sweat poured down his face. "Dad," he pleaded in a hushed whisper. "Dad, please make them stop." "You made your choices, Austin," I said firmly. "I told you how this would end. I told you I would see this through." The security chief spoke directly into his radio, his tone sharp and urgent. "Control, this is Alpha 1. We have a severe incident in the main dining area. I need the captain and the first officer to respond immediately. We have a confirmed child endangerment situation. Repeat. Repeat. Send child endangerment. Send a transport detail." Monica lunged toward the phone, trying to snatch it from the chief's hand. "Delete that!" she screamed hysterically. "You can't play that. That's private property. That was inside my home. You are violating my privacy." The chief caught her wrist firmly, not twisting it, but holding her completely steady. "Ma'am, do not put your hands on me. Step back immediately. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and a heavy silence returned to the room, this time out of respect for authority. Captain Johansson walked into the area, a tall man with graying hair and 4 gold bars gleaming on his shoulder straps, carrying the quiet authority of maritime law. He didn't look at the crowd, and he didn't look at the mess on the tables. He walked straight up to his head of security. "Report," the captain ordered. Chief handed him my phone and replayed the video clip. The captain watched the footage intently, taking in the sight of the chain, listening to the recorded dialogue, without so much as blinking until the clip finished. Once it ended, he handed the phone back to the chief. He turned to face Austin and Monica, his features as hard as stone. "In my 30 years at sea," the captain said, his voice deep and echoing clearly, "I have dealt with trespassers, fights, and the absolute worst behavior people can display. But I have never witnessed an act as utterly despicable as what you two have done." "Captain, please?" Monica attempted to turn on a charming tone, blinking back forced tears. "This is a massive misunderstanding. My father-in-law, he's just extremely vindictive." "Silence!" The captain's command cut through the air like a whip. "You no longer hold guest privileges on this vessel. You are no longer passengers. You are a risk to this ship." He turned directly to his security detail. "Escort this man and woman to the holding area immediately. Secure them in separate rooms until we dock back at Port Miami. No visitor access, no exceptions. Secure their personal electronics." "But we paid for a full suite," Austin protested weakly, his voice cracking. "We spent over $20,000. Your financial matters will be handled by the legal system," the captain stated coldly. "Remove them from my sight." 2 officers stepped forward, taking firm hold of Austin and Monica by the arms. Not using plastic ties this time, but applying a professional, unavoidable grip. Monica began screaming at the top of her lungs as she was led toward the exit, shouting about legal action, claiming she was a public figure, screaming that I had destroyed her entire life. Austin didn't make a sound. He simply hung his head, letting himself be led away like a man, walking toward a long overdue reckoning. As they were escorted out, the crowd remained completely quiet, watching the pair vanish down the hallway. The captain turned to face me. His tone softened significantly as he looked down at Mia and Leo, who were standing right beside my legs. "Mr. Slater," the captain said softly, "I apologize deeply that you and these children had to experience this on my ship. We will arrange private quarters for the 3 of you for the remainder of the trip back to Florida, fully accommodated." I looked down at Mia, who was looking up at me with wide, clear eyes. The terror that had gripped her for days was finally gone, replaced by a quiet sense of safety. I reached over and gently took Leo's hand as well. "Thank you, Captain," I said, holding my head high. "We'll take the accommodations. But right now, my grandkids need a proper meal." We walked out of the dining room together, stepping past the crowd that respectfully made way for us. For the first time in days, the weight on my shoulders felt manageable. The storm had passed, the task was complete, and I was finally bringing my family home. Here is the continuation of the complete narrative, continuing seamlessly in natural, smooth American voice-over prose, optimized for YouTube and safe for speech synthesis. I watched them being escorted out, my son bowing his head in shame as a chorus of disapproval echoed through the dining room. I felt a deep, hollow ache inside my chest, but I pressed it right back down. He had built his own situation, and now he had to face it. The captain turned back toward me, his expression softening slightly while maintaining a professional distance. "Mr. Slater," he said, "I take it you are their grandfather." "I am," I replied evenly. "And these are the children." "Yes, sir." "You took a very direct stance here today," the captain noted. "However, ship operations require order. I cannot have you moving freely through the passenger areas while we sort this out. We have official procedures for managing custody and minor safety." "I understand," I said. "I'm not here as a tourist, Captain. My only goal is their safety. We have secure guest quarters near the bridge," he explained. "It is quiet and isolated. You and the children will remain there until we dock at Port Miami. My staff will arrange proper meals for you. Real food." He looked down at Mia, who was standing behind my leg, holding on to her worn teddy bear. "Little lady," the captain said, kneeling down to her level. "Do you like cheeseburgers?" Mia gave a slow, hesitant nod. "I'll have the kitchen prepare the largest cheeseburger on the ship for you, along with a milkshake if you'd like. How does that sound?" A small, genuine smile appeared on her face. "Yes, please. Thank you." The captain stood up and motioned for us to follow. "Right this way." We walked out of the dining room, passing rows of half-eaten meals and tables surrounded by quiet onlookers. This time, we walked with our heads held high. I held Mia's hand in my left and Leo's in my right. What was intended as a luxury escape for my son had turned into a complete reckoning. While, for us, it was the start of a long overdue recovery. We left the noise behind, moving toward the quiet security of the upper quarters, finally reaching a place where we could catch our breath. For the first time in 2 days, the air felt clear and unburdened. The quarters near the bridge weren't restrictive, but they carried the quiet, functional feel of a secure outpost. It was compact, efficient, and deeply calm, with the only sound being the low hum of the ventilation system, alongside the steady eating of 2 exhausted children. Mia and Leo sat on the floor, leaning back against the bed frame, thoroughly enjoying the cheeseburgers the captain had promised. The quiet focus with which they ate brought a sharp tightness to my chest. They weren't just eating a meal. They were filling a void left by days of neglect and uncertainty. I sat in an armchair by the portal window, looking out at the dark ocean below. Under the night sky, the water looked like a deep, endless expanse. We were moving, heading toward our next point of arrival, but for us, the chaos had stopped. We were in a calm state, waiting for the reality of the legal system to meet us in Miami. I glanced down at my watch. 2 hours had passed since the incident in the dining hall, 2 hours since I had seen my son escorted away by security. I expected to feel a sense of accomplishment. I had protected the children and secured their safety, but all I felt was a heavy, quiet exhaustion. It was the specific kind of fatigue that comes when you realize that someone you raised has chosen a path entirely devoid of responsibility. A light knock sounded at the door. I tensed up instantly, expecting the captain or room service returning for the plates. "Stay right where you are," I told the kids. I walked over and cracked the door open just an inch. It wasn't room service. It was Austin. He looked terrible. The seam of his patterned shirt was torn at the shoulder, likely from struggling with security earlier, and his face was flushed and swollen. Surprisingly, he wasn't restrained. Standing right behind him was a young security guard who looked entirely uncomfortable, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. "I told him I needed to hand over Leo's inhaler," Austin muttered in a hushed tone. He couldn't bring himself to look me in the eye, staring fixedly at the doorframe instead. "Please, Dad." "Just 5 minutes." "Set." I looked past him to the guard. "He has 5 minutes, sir," the guard said, checking his watch. The captain ordered restricted movement, but Mr. Slater insisted this was a time-sensitive medical matter for the boy. I knew for a fact that Leo didn't have asthma. He never had. It was just another excuse, another attempt at manipulation. Austin was using a fake medical issue to buy time, just like he had used superficial appearances to hide his growing problems. I stepped back, opening the door just wide enough for him to step inside. "Make it quick." Austin slipped into the room, and the moment the door clicked shut, his frantic demeanor took over completely. He didn't ask about Leo, he didn't mention an inhaler, and he didn't even glance at the kids eating on the floor. Instead, he turned straight toward me and grabbed my arm, his hand cold and clammy. "You have to drop the charges," he whispered frantically, his voice cracking under pressure. "You have to tell the captain this was all a huge misunderstanding. Tell them you overreacted." I pulled my arm back sharply, repulsed by the contact. "Is that why you're here?" I kept my voice down so the kids wouldn't have to hear the worst of it. "To ask me to cover for you again. Just listen to me, Dad." Austin ran a hand through his messy hair, his breathing uneven. "You don't understand what's at stake here. The bank. If I'm facing serious charges or end up with a record for fraud or endangerment, I lose my license. I lose my position as branch manager. I lose everything." I stared at him, waiting for the moment he would ask about Mia. I waited for him to show an ounce of concern for his daughter after leaving her locked in a dark house for 48 hours. He didn't ask once. "Your main concern is your title at the bank," I noted quietly. "My concern is our whole life," Austin pleaded, his eyes wide and unfocused. "We have a mortgage. We have car payments. Monica, if the money stops, she's going to leave me. She told me outright she wouldn't stay with a failure." "Dad, you're ruining my marriage." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my son. I saw a complete stranger, a weak, desperate man who had built a life on a foundation of lies and was now blaming the tide for washing it away. "I didn't ruin your marriage, Austin," I said, stepping into his space and forcing him back until his waist hit the small desk. "Your marriage was ruined the moment your wife chained that refrigerator shut, and you went right along with it. It was ruined the moment you forged my signature to take money that didn't belong to you. It was a temporary line of credit," Austin wailed quietly. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed to double it. I had a solid tip on a volatile investment." "Enough." I raised a single hand. Not another word. I walked over to where the children were sitting. Leo had stopped eating, looking up at his father with an expression of profound disappointment. The look of a child watching a parent fall completely off their pedestal. Austin finally acknowledged them, trying to gather his composure and forcing a nervous, trembling smile. "Hey, buddy," he said to Leo. "Hey, Mia." Mia shrank back against the bed frame, pulling her knees up to her chest and hiding her face behind her teddy bear, refusing to look at him. Leo just stared at him with a cold, flat gaze. "Did you actually bring my inhaler, Dad?" Leo asked, his tone completely flat. Austin blinked, caught off guard. "What? You told the guard you had my inhaler," Leo said. "But I don't have asthma. So that was a lie, right? Just like the camp was a lie." Austin opened his mouth, then closed it, looking at me desperately, as if expecting me to step in and make excuses for him. I remained completely silent. "Dad." Austin turned back to me, his composure breaking entirely. Please, I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything to you? You always taught me that family stands together, that we protect our own. I did teach you that, I said quietly. I taught you that a man protects his family. But you aren't a protector, Austin. You became the threat. I walked over to the portal window and stared out at the dark water. Do you want to know what I found inside that refrigerator? I asked without turning around. Austin didn't answer. I found premium steaks, fresh seafood, and a cake decorated with happy vacation. I turned to face him. Naladard. You locked a hungry child inside a house with food she could see but couldn't touch. That wasn't just neglect, Austin. That was cruel. That was... Monica. Austin broke down, tears streaming down his face. She's obsessed with image. She said Mia was eating too much. She said, "You're coward." I cut him off sharply. You hid behind your wife's worst impulses because going along with it was easier than standing up like a man. You let her deprive your daughter because you were afraid of an argument. And you let her take my funds because you were too terrified to admit you were broke. I took a step closer to him. And now you come in here, not to apologize to Mia, but to beg me to save your reputation. You're afraid of losing a title. You're afraid the neighbors will find out you aren't the successful banker you pretend to be. You're afraid of being broke. I leaned in close enough that he could see the absolute finality in my eyes. Well, get used to it, son, because you're about to lose it all. Austin's face crumpled completely. He dropped his knees right there on the cabin carpet, grabbing onto the fabric of my pants. Dad, please. I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling. I'll pay back every single cent. Just don't press legal charges. Tell the captain it was an error. Tell him I'm a good father. I looked down at him, remembering the day he was born, remembering holding him in the hospital parking lot and swearing to keep him safe. I realized then that protecting him from every setback had been my greatest mistake. I had spent his entire life buffering him from consequences, fixing his bad grades, clearing his debts, making excuses for his poor choices. By refusing to let him face failure, I had helped create the man standing before me. I pulled my leg away. Get up, I ordered. He scrambled back to his feet, wiping his nose with his sleeve. I am not saving you this time, Austin, I said calmly. It's over. The bank will be informed. The authorities will handle the charges, and the truth will come out. You will lose the house, you will lose the car, and you will lose Monica. Because when the resources run out, people like her don't stick around. I pointed toward the door. But you're going to gain one thing. For the first time in your life, you're going to face the reality of your own actions. Austin glared at me, his pathetic pleading turning into a bitter, ugly resentment. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He hissed venomously. You always wanted me to fail. I was never good enough for you. With your medals and your military stories, looking down on everyone like you're above it all. No, I replied evenly. I'm just a retired logistics officer, and right now, I'm cutting away the dead weight. A sharp knock sounded at the door. Time's up, the guard called out from the hallway. Austin held my gaze for one last second, his eyes filled with pure bitterness. I hope you regret this, he muttered, under his breath. He turned and walked out the door without saying goodbye to his children, without a single backward glance. The door clicked shut behind him. A heavy silence returned to the room. I let out a long breath. I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the immense emotional toll of severing ties with my own son. Cutting away a part of your own family is a terrible thing, but sometimes it is the only way to protect what's left. I turned back to the kids. Leo had stopped eating, quiet tears rolling down his cheeks. "Grandpa," he sniffled softly, "is Dad going to jail?" I walked over and sat down between them, wrapping one arm around Leo and the other around Mia, pulling them close. "Yes, Leo," I said honestly. "I won't lie to you. He is going to face legal consequences." Leo buried his face in my chest, while Mia rested her head against my shoulder. "Is it my fault?" Leo asked softly. "Because I told the truth in the dining room?" "No." I kissed the top of his head. "Telling the truth is never your fault. Truth is the only thing that sets things right. Your father is facing consequences because of his own actions, not because of what you said." We sat in that quiet room in the middle of the ocean for a long time. Outside, the night was pitch black. But inside, we had food, we had safety, and we had a clean, definite sense of closure. The immediate search was over. Now, we just had to navigate the aftermath. After Austin left, the silence in the cabin felt heavier than steel. It was the kind of quiet that hums in your ears. I locked the door, flipped the deadbolt, and dragged the heavy armchair over to wedge it right under the handle. It wasn't standard procedure, but I was done taking chances. I was done trusting locks when other people held the keys. Mia hadn't moved from her spot on the floor. She was slowly picking at the sesame seeds on her remaining hamburger bun, her eyes red and puffy. She looked like a soldier who had survived the battle, but lost everything else along the way. "Grandpa," she whispered softly, "why does Daddy dislike me?" I dropped down on one knee in front of her, my joint popping loudly in the small room. "He doesn't dislike you, Mia. I chose my words with extreme care. He dislikes who he is. And people who dislike themselves are dangerous, because they try to tear down everyone around them, so they don't have to feel small on their own. You were just a reminder of the things he was trying to hide from." She didn't fully understand. How could she? She was 8 years old. But she leaned into me, and I held her tight. 10 minutes later, a faint sound came from the door. Not a loud knock, but a soft, hesitant scratching, like a stray pet looking for shelter. I stood up, moved the chair, and looked through the peephole. It was Leo. My biological grandson was standing in the hallway wearing designer silk pajamas, holding a pillow under one arm and his shoes in his hand. He looked terrified, constantly glancing back toward the elevators as if expecting someone to drag him away. I pulled the door open. Leo didn't say a word. He just slipped inside, brushing past me, and walking straight to the far corner of the room, sitting down as far from the door as possible. I locked the door again and replaced the chair before turning to look at him. Leo had his knees pulled up to his chest, resting his chin on his knees, swaying slightly back and forth. "Leo," I called softly. "What are you doing here, son?" He raised his head, his face streaked with tears and his lower lip bleeding slightly from nervous biting. "Mom is throwing things," he whispered. "She broke the lamp and the ice bucket. She said everything is my fault because I spoke up in the dining room. She called me a traitor and said, when we get back, she's sending me away to a strict board facility." A surge of anger flared up in my throat. Monica was taking her humiliation out on a 10-year-old boy, punishing him simply because he possessed the moral compass she entirely lacked. "You are not a traitor, Leo." I walked over to him. "You were the bravest person in that room." Leo shook his head violently. "No, I'm not. I'm a liar. I'm just like them." He looked across the room at Mia, who was watching him cautiously while clutching her teddy bear. There were only 5 feet of carpet between them, but it felt like a vast ocean. They had grown up in the same house, yet lived in completely different worlds. Leo treated like royalty, and Mia treated like an afterthought. Leo took a deep breath, reached into his pajama pocket, and pulled out a small item wrapped in a napkin, extending it toward Mia. "I kept this for you," he said softly, "from dinner before Grandpa showed up." Mia hesitated, looking up at me. I gave her a small nod. She crawled forward and took the napkin. Unwrapping it, she revealed a single chocolate truffle. It had melted slightly from the warmth of Leo's pocket, but to Mia it looked like a treasure. "Leo, why didn't you wake me up that night?" Mia asked, her voice carrying no anger, only a quiet sadness. "Why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" It was the question that had hung over us for 48 hours. Leo looked down at his hands, nervously picking at his skin until it bled. "Mom told me if I woke you up, we couldn't go," he said, his voice trembling. "She said, the ship only allowed 3 people. She said, if I told you, or if I made any noise, she'd take away my gaming console, and she said..." He stopped, choked up by sobs. "What did she say, Leo?" I asked gently. "She said you were terrible," Leo cried out. "She told me you stole money from her purse. She said you were dangerous and we had to leave you behind to teach you a lesson. She said, if I loved her, I'd help her." Mia stared at him. "I didn't steal anything," she whispered. "I know," Leo sobbed loudly. "I know you didn't." But I wanted to believe her, because I wanted so badly to go on the big boat with the water slides. I was selfish. I just wanted to go swimming. He buried his face in his pillow, letting out a heavy, painful cry. The sound of a child's innocence shattering under the weight of adult manipulation. Looking at him, I realized the full depth of what had been done. Monica hadn't just neglected Mia. She had weaponized Leo, turning him into an unwilling accomplice. She had bought his silence with gifts, poisoned his mind with lies, and forced him to choose between his sister and his mother's approval. It was a burden no child should ever have to carry. Mia moved forward, setting the chocolate aside. She crawled over the remaining space, reached out, and placed a small hand on Leo's shoulder. "It's okay, Leo," she said softly. Leo looked up, his eyes filled with disbelief. "How can it be okay? I left you. You were all alone, in the dark." "But you came back," Mia stated simply. "You told the truth to the officers, and you brought me chocolate." Leo dropped his pillow and wrapped his arms around his sister. Mia held him right back, holding on to each other like 2 survivors clinging to the same piece of driftwood after a storm. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched them, feeling my heart ache and heal all at once. For years, I had viewed Leo as a younger version of Austin. I had seen the entitlement, the way he ignored Mia, and the endless demands for expensive things. I had distanced myself, assuming he was already turning into a clone of his parents. I was wrong. He wasn't a clone. He was a captive. He was a victim of a toxic dynamic, just as Mia was the scapegoat. Both had been mistreated, just in different ways. Mia starved of basic care, and Leo fed a steady diet of materialism and emotional pressure. In that moment, my mission changed entirely. When I boarded this vessel, I came solely to retrieve Mia, planning to take her away and leave Austin and Monica to face their own ruin, assuming Leo belonged to their world. But watching him hold his sister, I knew I couldn't leave him behind. If I left him, he would be completely broken. Monica would punish him endlessly for standing up today, crushing his spirit until he became just like his father. A man driven entirely by fear and lacking any spine. I wasn't going to let that happen. I stood up, walked into the small bathroom, and wet a hand towel with cold water before returning and kneeling beside them. "Clean your face, son." I handed the towel to Leo. He took it and wiped his eyes, looking up at me with a mix of fear and faint hope. "Are you going to send me back, Grandpa?" he asked nervously. "Back to their room?" "No," I said firmly. "But Mom said I have to go back. She said she's calling lawyers." "Let her call," I stated. "She can call whoever she wants. You aren't going back to that room. You're staying right here with me and Mia." "But where do I sleep?" Leo looked around the compact cabin. "There's only one bed." I offered a small smile, my first genuine smile in days. "Have you ever built a defensive bunker, soldier?" Leo shook his head. "Well, you're about to learn." I stood up and grabbed the extra pillows while Mia gathered the blankets. We moved the small furniture aside, pulled the extra mattress off the frame, and laid it flat on the floor, using the armchair cushions and sheets to build a secure little fort right in the middle of the room. It wasn't a luxury suite or an oceanfront penthouse. It was just a pile of bedding on a cabin floor. But as the three of us crawled in and settled under the duvet, it felt like the safest place on earth. "Grandpa?" Leo whispered in the dark. "Yeah, Leo? Are you taking us home?" "I am," I said. "Both of us?" he asked softly. I reached out in the dark, finding his hand with one of mine, and Mia's with the other, squeezing them both firmly. "Listen to me," I said, my voice low and steady in the quiet room. "I'm not just your grandfather anymore. I am your protector. I don't care what lawyers your parents try to hire, and I don't care what it costs. I am fighting for both of you. You two are a team now. Slater Unit. Nobody gets left behind ever again. Period." "Promise?" Mia asked softly. "I promise," I said. I lay there, listening as their breathing slowed down and they drifted off to sleep, completely exhausted. But I stayed wide awake. My mind shifted right back into operational mode, planning the next phase. Getting off the ship was the easy part. The legal battle ahead was where the real fight lay. Austin would try to retain custody of Leo, not out of love, but because Leo represented an asset, an heir, and proof of a normal family life. Losing Mia was an inconvenience to them, but losing Leo would be a total blow to Austin's pride. He would use every tactic, every excuse, and every shred of leverage he thought he had. What he didn't realize was what I held in reserve. He didn't know about the original trust documents from 20 years ago. He didn't know the specific terms on his property deeds. And he didn't realize I had spent my entire life preparing for worst-case scenarios. I looked up at the quiet cabin ceiling. "Rest up, kids." I thought to myself. "Because when we land in Miami, your grandfather is going to war. And I have never lost a war." I stepped into the compact cabin bathroom, shutting the door behind me until it clicked tightly shut. The space was tight, barely large enough for a man my size to turn around in. The bright overhead light hummed softly, casting long shadows across the white tile. I caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, and the lines around my mouth looked deeper than they had just this morning. I looked less like a man who had been in a 2-day dispute and more like someone who had spent decades in constant operational duty. "Sit down" on the closed toilet lid. I pulled the satellite phone from my heavy jacket pocket. The thick device had been provided by the captain, who explained it was a secure line that bypassed the ship's stand switchboard. I dialed Rachel Stein's number. Rachel wasn't a standard family law attorney. She didn't handle quiet divorces or manage simple estate planning. Rachel was an absolute force in the courtroom. I had met her 10 years ago when the military was resolving a complex logistics dispute involving millions in supply chain contracts. She was the kind of lawyer whose presence instantly shifted the tone of a room. Completely strategic, sharp, and focused purely on outcomes. Right now, I didn't need emotional support. I needed an absolute legal weapon. She picked up on the second ring. Bill, her voice came through crisp, clear, and completely alert, despite knowing it was past midnight back in Florida. I've been waiting for your call. I take it you are on the vessel. I am, I said. The immediate situation is contained. The kids are with me, and Austin and Monica are currently being held by ship security. Good, she said cleanly. That simplifies the emergency custody filing. Charges of endangerment are nearly impossible to refute when you are held in a maritime detention space. But, Bill, we have a much larger issue on our hands. I rubbed my forehead. I assumed the issue was the $25,000 Austin withdrew from my account. That's just the surface, Rachel said, her voice dropping to that measured tone she used when delivering critical news. After you called about the withdrawal, I ran a comprehensive financial audit on Austin. I wanted to see if he was hiding funds in secondary accounts. I didn't find hidden cash, Bill. I found debt. Massive debt. How much? I asked. Bill, are you seated? I am. Over the last 18 months, Austin has leveraged every single asset he could get his hands on. Rachel continued relentlessly. It started with high-limit credit cards. He maxed out 5 of them. Then he took out personal loans, unsecured, high-interest lines. He ran through all of that. But it didn't stop there. She paused, the faint static of the satellite link filling the silence between us. 6 months ago, he executed a power of attorney document, she explained. He used it to take out a massive equity line against your primary property. The home you paid off in full, the one you held outright. Or at least, the home you thought you held outright. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hand gripping the heavy phone until the casing creaked. My home, I whispered. The house my late wife Sarah and I had built together. The house where we raised Austin. The property meant to serve as a secure foundation for Mia and Leo. He drew out $300,000 in equity, Rachel went on. And he kept going. When traditional lenders cut him off, he turned to private high-risk lenders. I have records showing his vehicle is leveraged, along with formal notices from a private lending firm operating out of Hialeah. The kind that caters to high-risk borrowers. Bill, these aren't standard banking institutions. They charge predatory interest rates and they enforce collections very aggressively. I closed my eyes. It all made sense now. The desperation in Austin's eyes when he came to our cabin. He wasn't just terrified of losing his job. He was terrified of losing his life. He had dug a hole so deep he couldn't see the sky anymore, but instead of asking for a ladder, he decided to keep digging, hoping to break through on the other side. Where did the money go, Rachel? I asked. $300,000 in equity, plus those private lenders, plus the money he stole from me. Where is it? Speculative investments, she said, her voice dripping with disgust. He bought into a high-risk digital currency scam that collapsed last month. He lost 80% of it in 48 hours. He was trying to win it back. That's why he stole the $25,000 from you. It wasn't to kick out into the rain. It wasn't just to pay for the cruise. He was making desperate trades on his phone, trying to hit a jackpot to pay off those lenders before you ever noticed. A wave of nausea hit me. It was a sickening moment of absolute clarity. My son wasn't just a terrible father. He was a walking financial disaster. He had strapped a bomb of debt around our entire family and pulled the pin. "What does this mean for the house?" I asked. "It means foreclosure, Bill," Rachel said simply. "The equity payments are 3 months overdue. The bank is preparing the formal default notices right now. If we do nothing, you lose the home. You lose the land. In 60 days, you're out on the street." I sat in the quiet bathroom, listening to the soft hum of the fan. 60 days. I was 68 years old. I had my pension and some savings, but in this market, I couldn't buy a new place. And I certainly couldn't raise 2 traumatized kids in a small rented apartment. Austin hadn't just abandoned his daughter for a vacation. He had stolen their future home. "What are my options?" I asked. Rachel took a deep breath. "This is where it gets tough, Bill. Option A. You assume the debt. You try to pay it off. You liquidate your retirement savings. You sell your truck. And you might even have to sell part of the land to satisfy the bank. You protect Austin from criminal charges, but you bankrupt yourself and leave those kids with nothing." "And option B?" I asked, knowing the answer before she even spoke. "Option B is the nuclear option," Rachel said. "We report the fraud. We go straight to law enforcement and the bank, submitting a formal affidavit stating you never executed that power of attorney. We prove Austin forged your signature. If we do that, the bank absorbs the loss. The debt becomes invalid against you because it was obtained through identity theft. You keep the house and you keep your savings." "But Austin goes to prison," I said softly. "Yes," Rachel confirmed. "And not just for a weekend. We're talking bank fraud, wire fraud, and severe identity theft against a senior. Those carry mandatory minimum sentences in federal court. He's looking at 10 years, Bill. Maybe 15. 10 years. My son." I looked toward the bathroom door. Outside, my grandkids were fast asleep inside their pillow fort. They had finally found a sense of peace. They believed I could protect them. They believed their grandfather could fix everything. If I chose option A, if I tried to shield Austin, I would break my promise to them. I would throw away the resources needed to raise them, keep them fed, and give them a stable home. I would be sacrificing the innocent to save the guilty. If I chose option B, I would be the one putting handcuffs on my own son. I would be the one testifying against him in court. I would be sending him away for a decade. "Bill," Rachel's voice cut through the silence, "I need to know how you want to proceed. The financial institutions open in 5 hours. If we're filing a fraud claim, we need to strike before the foreclosure moves forward. We need to act. First." I stood up and looked in the mirror again. The man staring back had tears in his eyes, but his gaze was as hard as iron. It was the look of a commander who had just ordered an artillery strike on his own position to stop the enemy from advancing. Austin had made his choice. He made it when he picked up the pen and forged my name. He made it when he chained that refrigerator shut. He made it when he chose his own greed over his family. Now, I had to make mine. I thought about the yellow note resting on top of that lobster. Be good. Austin had never been good. He had been enabled, he had been shielded, and that constant protection had allowed him to rot from the inside out. Saving him now wouldn't help him. It would only allow him to destroy everything else left standing. Rachel, I said. I'm here, Bill. File the claims. There was a brief silence on the line, a moment of solemn respect. Are you sure? She asked softly. Once I submit this documentation, there's no walking it back. Federal prosecutors will take over immediately. I'm sure. My voice was surprisingly steady. He stole my home. He stole my grandkids' future. He isn't acting like my son, Rachel. He's a threat. Cut him loose. Understood, Rachel replied. When you dock in Miami, I'll have the formal paperwork ready for your signature. I'll meet you right at the pier alongside the authorities. One more thing, I added. Go ahead. Those private lenders, the ones in Hialeah. I'll handle them, Rachel said, and I could almost hear the sharp smile in her voice. I'll attach a cease and desist notice to the fraud filings. Once they realize federal authorities are involved and the debt is tied to an active criminal investigation, they'll scatter like roaches. They won't want any federal scrutiny. They'll write it off and disappear. Thank you, Rachel. Get some rest, Bill. You've got a tough day ahead tomorrow. I ended the call and sat there for another minute, just breathing. I felt a strange sense of weight lifting. The decision was devastating, but it was right. It was a necessary operation to remove the damage before it spread. I washed my face with cold water, dried my hands, and unlocked the door and walked back into the cabin. The room was dark and quiet. I walked over to the pillow fort. Mia was sleeping with her thumb near her mouth, holding tightly onto Leo's sleeve. Leo was snoring softly, his face relaxed, looking like a child again, completely freed from the pressure his mother had placed on him. I lay down on the floor beside them. I didn't have a pillow, but I didn't care. I stretched my arm over them, forming a physical shield. Austin was going to lose everything. His freedom, his reputation, and his status. He was going to spend the next 10 years reflecting on where it all went wrong. But this family, the three of us, right here on the floor, we were going to be okay. We were keeping the house. We were going to plant a garden. We were going to bake real, fresh bread. I closed my eyes as the ship rocked gently, carrying us toward the morning. I was ready. I was the final line of defense, and nothing was ever going to harm these children again. The final stretch back to Miami was a blur of gray ocean and heavy silence. Icon of the seas, which had looked like a luxury paradise just 2 days ago, now felt like a giant steel enclosure. When the ship's thrusters finally fired up to guide the vessel into its berth at Port Miami, the vibration rattled straight through the deck. It was the sound of reality crashing right back into our lives. I stood on the lower gangway deck holding Mia's hand in my left and Leo's in my right. We didn't join the rest of the passengers. We didn't mix with the crowd, carrying souvenirs and duty-free bags toward customs. Instead, we were guided through a private exit by the first officer and 2 security guards. Walking ahead of us, flanked by 4 ship officers, were Austin and Monica. They looked like complete shells of their former selves. Austin's shirt was crumpled and stained with sweat. He walked with his head down, staring fixedly at his shoes, as if they were the only things keeping him grounded. Monica, on the other hand, was still trying to maintain an illusion. She had reapplied her makeup and fixed her hair, holding her chin up and staring straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the guards holding her arms. She was walking toward her holding area with a strange defiance, the kind held by someone who still believed calling a manager could fix everything. We stepped off the metal ramp onto the concrete pier, and the Florida heat hit us instantly. Thick, humid, smelling of salt and fuel. But unlike the warmth in Nassau, this heat felt like being under a spotlight. Waiting at the bottom of the ramp weren't taxi drivers or tour buses. There were 3 dark government-issue SUVs. Standing beside them were law enforcement officers in tactical vests, along with representatives from the Miami-Dade Police Department. Standing right in front of them, looking entirely unyielding, was Rachel Stein, my attorney. She was holding a thick folder. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She simply gave a sharp, professional nod, acknowledging that the plan was in motion. The ship's security team stopped at the base of the ramp, handing over documentation to the lead federal officer, a tall man wearing sunglasses, with a jawline that looked like it could crush iron. Austin stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the vehicles, looked at the gear on the officers' belts, and the reality of the situation finally pierced through his denial. His knees visibly gave out, and the guards had to catch him under the arms to keep him upright. Monica, however, let out a sharp, unbelievable laugh. "Is all of this really necessary?" she demanded, her voice loud and echoing off the hull of the ship. "Creating a massive scene over a minor family disagreement? Do you have any idea how much we pay in taxes? We are top-tier loyalty members with this cruise line." The lead officer stepped forward, keeping his sunglasses on. "Monica Slater?" he asked calmly. "It's Mrs. Slater," she corrected, snapping her fingers. "And before I say another word to any of you, I demand to speak with my legal representation." "Monica Slater and Austin Slater," the officer interrupted, his voice flat and completely unbothered. "You are being taken into custody under federal warrants for bank fraud, wire fraud, severe identity theft, and child endangerment." He gestured to the officers beside him. "Process them." "No!" Monica shrieked, trying to twist out of the guard's grip, only to be promptly restrained by an officer. "You can't touch me. This is a complete mistake. Bill set this up." She spun around, searching for me, her eyes locking onto where I stood 10 feet away, keeping the children sheltered behind me. "Bill, tell them!" she screamed hysterically. "Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you forgot you signed those papers. Stop this right now. It isn't funny." I looked at her. The woman who had mistreated my granddaughter, turned my son into a thief, and lived lavishly on stolen funds. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, just a quiet, cold realization that the ledger was finally balanced. "I didn't sign anything, Monica," I said quietly. "And legally, neither did Austin." "Liar!" She lunged toward me, but the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists with a sharp, final sound. "You're just bitter," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You're a bitter old man trying to ruin our happiness because your own life is miserable. You're trying to ruin my image. Do you know how many followers I have? I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to destroy you." "Search her belongings," the lead officer ordered cleanly. An officer searched her bag and retrieved her smartphone. "Hey, give that back. That is private property," Monica yelled, straining against the restraint. "This is evidence now, ma'am," the officer replied, sealing the device into a secure bag. Austin didn't fight at all. As the officer approached him, he slowly turned around and offered his wrists, quietly crying as he looked over the officer's shoulder straight at me. He mouthed 2 words. "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. An apology without accountability is just noise, and right now, Austin had nothing left to offer. They guided them toward the SUVs. The scene was drawing attention now. Dock workers paused their equipment, and passengers looking down from the upper decks were taking photos and pointing. Monica Slater was finally getting the attention she had always chased. She was the absolute center of focus. Except the story had shifted from a lifestyle post to a criminal investigation. As they guided Austin into the back of the first vehicle, he looked over at Leo. "Leo, son," Austin called out, his voice raspy. "Be good, okay? Listen to your grandfather." "I will," Leo said, standing stiffly by my side. He didn't wave, and he didn't cry. He simply watched his father disappear behind the tinted glass. He learned a lesson that day no school could teach. Actions carry real consequences, and some mistakes can't be undone with an apology or a gift. Monica fought until the very last second. As they tried to place her into the second vehicle, she braced her feet against the doorframe. "I didn't do anything wrong," she screamed out to the sky, to the ship, to anyone listening. "I am a good mother. I left her food. She had bread. She's making it all up. That girl is a liar." The officer carefully guided her head to clear the frame and secured her inside, shutting the door firmly. Her muffled shouts were cut off instantly. The silence that followed was heavy. Gulls called overhead, and the water lapped against the wooden pilings below. Rachel walked over to us, looking down at the kids before turning to me. "Are they all right?" she asked softly. "They will be," I said. The lead officer stepped up, taking off his sunglasses. He looked exhausted. "Mr. Slater, we have everything we need. The digital evidence you provided from the vessel, combined with the financial records Rachel submitted, makes this case ironclad. We're recommending no bail. They pose a flight risk and have shown a clear pattern of intimidation." "Thank you," I said. "We'll need formal statements from you and the children later," he added. "We have a dedicated support center near the station. It's comfortable, quiet, and equipped for kids. They can speak with specialists rather than sitting in an interrogation room." I nodded. "That works. We're ready." I looked down at Mia. She was staring at the spot where Monica's vehicle had just driven off. She was shaking slightly. Not out of fear, but from the sudden release of tension. The threat was gone. The nightmare was over. "Is she ever coming back, Grandpa?" Mia whispered. "No, sweetheart," I told her softly. "Not for a very long time." We turned and walked toward Rachel's car, holding both of their hands tightly in mine. Behind us, the massive cruise ship loomed, a towering monument to excess and superficial appearances. But we were walking from it, heading toward my reliable old truck, toward my home and smaller, but entirely, simpler, but entirely honest life. The handcuffs had closed on them. But for us, that sound marked the moment the doors to our freedom finally opened. We were finally clear. The family court building in downtown Miami smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a place where illusions went to break apart. And the harsh realities of broken homes were processed mechanically every 15 minutes. For us, however, this wasn't just another legal proceeding. This was the final stand. I sat on a hard wooden bench in the front row. To my left sat Rachel Stein, wearing a sharp charcoal suit, looking completely focused and ready. To my right sat the court-appointed advocate, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had spent the last 2 weeks interviewing Mia and Leo. Across the aisle sat Austin and Monica. They weren't wearing designer clothes today. They were wearing standard-issue orange jumpsuits, their wrists secured by light restraints at their waists. The transformation was striking. Without the expensive watches and tailored shirts, Austin looked remarkably small, like a child playing dress-up in clothes, far too big for him. Monica looked worse. Her styled hair had grown out at the roots. Her makeup was completely gone, and her face carried a bitter, angry glare. She kept glancing toward the back of the courtroom, where the press was strictly barred, looking for an audience that wasn't there. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Elena Vance walked briskly up to the bench. A woman in her 60s with eyes that looked like they had seen every possible variation of human misconduct. She didn't look at the attorneys. She looked straight at the two defendants. "Be seated," she ordered cleanly. "We are here to determine permanent custody arrangements for Leo Slater and Mia Slater. We are also addressing the petition for the complete termination of parental rights, submitted by Mr. William Slater." Austin's public defender stood up, a young man in a simple suit who looked visibly uncomfortable, fully aware he was standing in front of an overwhelming case. "Your Honor," he began, his voice wavering slightly, "my clients acknowledge that mistakes were made. However, they believe that terminating parental rights entirely is an extreme measure. They are willing to enter counseling and complete parenting courses. They care for their children, and they believe that with time and rehabilitation—" Judge Vance raised a single hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Counsel," the judge said coldly, "I have reviewed the official police reports from Port Miami. I have viewed the video evidence, showing a locked refrigerator. I have read the psychological evaluations of these children. Do not waste this court's time using the word mistakes. This was not a mistake. It was systematic mistreatment." She turned her gaze toward Rachel. "Attorney Stein," the judge said, "you noted additional financial evidence on record related to child welfare." Rachel stood up smoothly, needing no notes, having mastered every detail of the case. "Yes, Your Honor," Rachel stated. "While the criminal charges regarding bank fraud and property theft are proceeding through federal court, we uncovered a specific financial matter directly relevant to the defendant's fitness as parents." Rachel stepped toward the evidence table, picking up a document, sealed in a protective sleeve. 13 years ago, when William Slater's late wife passed away, she left a modest inheritance. Mr. Slater did not spend those funds. He placed them into a protected trust, specifically set aside for his grandchildren's future education. After Mia was adopted, he added her name to the trust to ensure she received the exact same opportunities as Leo. I saw Austin's shoulders go rigid. He hadn't realized I knew about this part. He thought I only knew about the house. Rachel continued. "The trust was established with strict conditions. Withdrawals could only be made for educational expenses or severe medical emergencies, requiring the explicit signature of the trustee, William Slater." She handed the document to the bailiff, who presented it to the judge. 2 days before the defendants boarded that cruise ship, Rachel said, $25,000 was drawn from that trust. The reason listed on the bank form was that Mia Slater required urgent medical care. The courtroom fell dead silent. "Urgent medical care," the judge repeated, looking over the paper. Rachel nodded. "There was no medical care, Your Honor. Mia was in good health. The funds were withdrawn in cash, and by tracking the serial numbers, we verified that those exact funds were used to pay for an upgrade to the Royal Loft Suite on Icon of the Seas." Rachel paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. "Your Honor, they didn't just leave Mia behind. They took her education fund to pay for the very luxury trip that excluded her. They used her future to finance her abandonment." I glanced over at Monica. For the first time, she lowered her head. Even she, with all her arrogance, couldn't spin this. Taking from your own child's future was a line that crossed beyond simple family dysfunction into complete betrayal. Rachel held up a final document. "And this," she said, "is the withdrawal slip bearing William Slater's signature. As proven by handwriting experts and Mr. Slater's sworn affidavit, he was not at the bank that day. He was working at home. The signature was forged by Austin Slater as a former branch manager to bypass standard security protocols." The judge reviewed the documents carefully, adjusting her glasses as she examined the signature before looking up at Austin. "Mr. Slater," the judge asked, her voice dangerously calm, "do you have anything to say?" Austin stood up, his restraints clinking against the wooden table. He looked over at me, searching for the father who used to stand up for him, the father who paid his tuition, the father who smoothed over his mistakes. But that father wasn't there. Standing in his place was the retired logistics officer who had just cut off his supply lines. Austin stammered out. "I was going to put it back. Once my investments recovered, I was going to return the principal plus interest." "So it's true," the judge stated flatly. "You gambled your daughter's education fund on high-risk internet schemes?" "It wasn't gambling," Austin cried out, desperation cracking his voice. "It was an investment. I did it for the family. I wanted to give them a great life." "You did it for yourself," the judge barked back. She slammed the folder shut, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. "I have heard enough." She picked up her gavel, proceeding without hesitation or consultation with her clerk. "In the matter of Slater v. Slater, this court finds that the defendants, Austin Slater and Monica Slater, have demonstrated a complete criminal disregard for the physical, emotional, and financial well-being of these children. This court finds them entirely unfit to exercise parental rights under any legal definition." She turned her gaze toward me. "Full, permanent legal and physical custody of Leo Slater and Mia Slater is hereby granted to Mr. William Slater." She turned back to face Austin and Monica. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I grant the petition for the total termination of parental rights. You have forfeited the privilege of parenthood. You are barred from contacting these children until they reach 18 years of age. And even then, only if they independently seek you out. Though given what I have seen today, I highly doubt they will." "No!" Monica shrieked, leaping out of her chair and knocking it over. "You can't do this. They are my children. I built my entire online presence around them. You are ruining my life. Bailiffs, remove them," the judge ordered without raising her eyes. 2 bailiffs stepped forward, seizing Monica by the arms. She struggled frantically, shouting about her rights, her social media presence, and claiming it was all a setup. Austin offered no resistance at all. He went completely limp in the officer's grip, his feet dragging along the floor as he was led away. I watched them be escorted out, listening as the heavy double doors swung shut behind them. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of relief and a quiet promise of safety. The judge looked over at me, her expression softening. "Mr. Slater," she said gently, "I wish you the best. You have a long road ahead, and raising children at this stage in life is no small task." I stood up and buttoned my suit jacket, feeling stronger and more grounded than I had in years. "Your Honor, I've handled tough assignments before," I said clearly. "This isn't tough, it's necessary." We walked out of the courtroom together. Rachel walked beside me, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "It's finished, Bill," she said quietly. "They're done. The federal proceedings move forward next month, but they won't be coming back. The house is secure, and the kids are safe." I nodded, walking over to the large window at the end of the hallway and looking down at the street below. I watched the transport vehicle, waiting to carry Austin and Monica back to detention. I thought about the money tucked away in my boot, the panic in Mia's voice when she first called, and Leo's quiet tears in the cabin. It had cost me a son. It had cost me my peace of mind. It had cost me the illusion of a quiet retirement. But as I turned away from the window to head home with the two children waiting for me in the lobby, I knew I had made the only choice that truly mattered. I had traded a lie for the truth. And the truth, even when heavy, felt like solid ground beneath my feet. The farmhouse we bought sits on 4 quiet acres nestled in the hills of North Carolina. It's a simple, modest home. The floorboards creak when you walk on them, and on windy nights, the breeze whistles down the chimney. But it is completely ours. Paid for in full, and above all, entirely safe. I stood at the kitchen island, kneading a loaf of sourdough bread. Baking had become a daily ritual for me, a hands-on, grounding process of turning basic ingredients into something nourishing. It's honest work. You can't shortcut bread dough. If you rush it or handle it roughly, it simply won't rise. Through the window over the sink, I could see Leo outside. He wasn't staring at a screen or worrying about expensive clothes. He was holding a tennis ball, playing fetch with the 2 rescue dogs we adopted from the shelter last month. Wearing grass-stained jeans and an old t-shirt, he was laughing out loud. A deep, genuine laugh that echoed across the yard. Mia sat at the kitchen table behind me, drawing. Over the last 6 months, she had filled 3 entire sketchbooks with drawings of trees, the dogs, and our home. "Grandpa," she held up her page. "Look." It was a drawing of the 3 of us standing in front of the farmhouse, complete with a bright sun wearing sunglasses in the corner. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." I wiped the flour from my hands. "Let's put it on the fridge." The refrigerator, an appliance that once represented a source of fear for her, was now covered entirely in her artwork. Inside, it was stocked with fresh food, milk, and fruit, and it was never locked. Sometimes Mia would still open it, just to check, staring inside for a second, smiling softly, and closing the door. It was her way of reminding herself that she was safe. The crunch of gravel in the driveway announced the arrival of the mail delivery. I walked down to the mailbox at the end of the lane. The air was crisp, carrying the fresh scent of pine and soil. I waved to the mail carrier, and he waved back. He didn't know my background, or the story behind the news articles from months ago. To him, I was just Bill, the veteran, who bought the old Miller property. I sorted through the mail as I walked back. An electric bill, a garden catalog, coupons for farm supplies. Then I paused. The final envelope was liant, stamped in red ink. Federal Correctional Institution. Sue. Low security. The name in the corner read, Austin Slater. I stopped right in the middle of the driveway. The sun felt warm on my shoulders, but the envelope felt cold in my hand. I hadn't heard from him in 6 months. Rachel mentioned he had attempted to reach out, but I had blocked the lines from the facility, cutting off direct contact. Yet, letters always managed to find a way through. I walked inside and set the letter on the counter, right next to the rising bread dough, making no attempt to hide it. "What's that, Grandpa?" Leo asked, coming in through the back door and wiping his boots on the mat. Just a notice, I said quietly. Nothing we need to worry about. I waited until later that evening, long after the kids were fast asleep and the house was still. I sat in the armchair by the stone fireplace, listening to the wood crackle as it kept the evening chill away. I picked up the letter and opened it with a small knife, pulling out a page of lined yellow paper covered in messy, frantic writing. Dear Dad, it began. I scanned through the lines quickly. It was exactly what I had anticipated. No questions about how Leo was doing in school, and no concern for Mia's well-being. It was simply a long list of grievances. The food was awful. The guards were strict. Monica was filing for divorce and blaming him for everything. He needed funds for his commissary account, and he wanted me to finance an appeal. I found faith, Dad. God told me you would forgive me. Reading those words almost made me laugh out loud. Austin hadn't changed. He was just looking for a new angle, trying to adapt to his surroundings without addressing any of the real issues beneath the surface. At the very end of the page, he made a demand framed as a plea. You owe me this, Dad. You raised me. You can't just leave your son here. I set the letter down and looked at the fire, watching the orange and yellow flames consume the oak logs, reducing them to ash to warm the room. I don't owe you a thing, I whispered to the empty room. I gave you a strong upbringing, support, and opportunities, and you responded with betrayal. You left behind a granddaughter dealing with trauma and a grandson who had to unlearn a world of superficial pressure. My loyalty belongs to the children sleeping safely upstairs. My duty is to protect the innocent, and sometimes protecting the innocent means stepping up to do what needs to be done, regardless of how others see it. I didn't refold the paper. I didn't send it to my lawyer, and I didn't keep it as a reminder. I leaned forward and dropped the letter directly into the flames. It landed on a burning log, the edges curling and turning black within seconds. Before the fire swallowed the page entirely, the name Austin Slater burned away first, followed by the complaints and the superficial excuses. I watched until it was reduced to a soft gray ash floating up the chimney into the night sky. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the last bit of tension leave my shoulders. People often say that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, and that you should always forgive and forget. They are mistaken. Family isn't defined strictly by shared DNA. It's defined by who stands by you when things get difficult and who steps up to protect you. To protect this family, I had to cut away what was causing us harm. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but looking around this quiet house, listening to the peace that replaced the old lies, I know without a doubt that I made the right choice. My name is Bill Slater. I am a father, and I am a grandfather. And finally, we are free.